we didn't last week, but now we've added the postcards to the list that you can sign up for. We provide the postcards, we provide the addresses and what to say, okay? I have over the last month gotten to know organizers that work for Greenpeace and with Fire Drill Fridays, and I mean, they are really something. And we have a dedicated Latinx and constituency group of organizers who are going to be working around the clock to ensure that we engage and turn out Latinx voters. Latinx with an X, that means instead of you're having to say Latino and Latina, it means both genders, Latinx votes in November. I'm explaining that because people have asked me why I do that. So if you're a Spanish speaker, please sign up. You are so important to us. Research shows that Latinx people tend to care more about climate than all other ethnic groups put together. Well, I don't know about put together, but they are the top of the people who really care about climate. And African American people also care, next to Latinx, care about the climate more than whites. In other words, as Jakata Imani, a board member with Greenpeace USA, has said, if Black and brown people could vote, the world would be green. Yes. So please go to firedrillfriday.com, volunteer, and sign up so our organizers can reach out to you and get you plugged in. I hope you'll join us. It feels good to be part of a community working for the same thing. And the folks that'll be training you are top-notch, experienced organizers. And so you'll learn about the beautiful job of organizing. And some of you may decide to become organizers. Some of you may find yourselves in leadership roles as Greenpeace US and Fire Drill Fridays gear up for November and beyond. It's been another big week here in the USA. We crossed the 3 million mark of confirmed COVID cases. As other countries begin to reopen, our so-called leadership continues to fail us. Our hearts go out to the essential workers who continue to put their lives and their families' lives on the line so the rest of us can continue to live our lives. And next week, those of you who signed up with us are going to receive a short in memoriam video honoring those essential workers who've died. We agree with the Mother Jones statement, and for those of you who don't know, she was a champion of the working class in the early 1900s. Mother Jones said, "Pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living." So if you've signed up with us, we're going to be asking you next week to forward the video to senators, demanding that they pass the HEROES Act, which includes the Essential Workers Bill of Rights. And, you know, hey, in the midst of all this bad stuff, there's good news, big time good news in the anti-fossil fuel fight. Listen to this. Earlier this week, a federal judge ruled that owners of the Dakota Access Pipeline, DAPL, must halt operations while the government conducts a full-fledged analysis examining the risks DAPL poses to the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Oh, God. The shutdown will remain in place pending completion of a full environmental review, which normally takes several years, and the issuance of new permits. It may be up to a new administration to make final permitting decisions. This is a huge, huge victory for Standing Rock and the Cheyenne River Sioux tribes. And we celebrate with all of you who helped make this a reality. I want to read the statement from the Indigenous Environmental Network, who were essential in the victory and in the global campaign that led to this moment. Here's what they say. "We are celebrating this order as it vindicates the many prayers, actions, and legal arguments of Oceti-Sakowin tribal nations and communities. The Standing Rock and Cheyenne River Sioux tribes have shown the world that treaty rights and environmental justice are not token concepts without merit, but rather tangible arguments that inherently protect the sacredness of Mother Earth. We will continue to fight until DAPL is stopped completely. Yes. And another piece of good pipeline news concerns the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Just this week, Dominion and Duke Energy canceled their 6-year, $8 billion bid to build this massive fracked gas pipeline. Duke and Dominion had hoped to carve up beautiful mountains in Virginia and North Carolina, and just, it's the most gorgeous landscape, and they were going to destroy it, and they were going to ignore catastrophic climate change and delay a just transition to renewable energy to build this pipeline. But thanks to the courageous indigenous-led activists who stood up to them, they have failed. Their epic failure should be a warning to other fossil fuel companies hoping to double down on dirty pipelines. The future does not belong to you. Instead of investing in renewable energy, Dominion had justified their attempt to build this massive fracked gas pipeline, which would have been the first to cross the Appalachian Trail, by saying the major data centers like Amazon centers in Virginia needed fracked gas. But opponents knew a fracked gas pipeline would only lock us into a long-term reliance on a dangerous fuel at the exact moment we need to be urgently transitioning our electricity grid onto renewables and off of fossil fuels. This victory for all the brave activists, residents, and communities who stood up to these fossil fuel companies to protect their land and their futures, this is their victory. And finally, good news always tends to happen in threes, right? This week, the US Supreme Court upheld a federal judge's rejection of a crucial permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, preventing its construction in the US. Yes, you don't know how important this is. I'm sure you know by now that Black and brown people are often not, oh yeah, this is a whole other, let's just take a moment to think about the importance of what's just happened with these 3 pipelines. I mean, hopefully this is like a domino effect, and it's going to keep happening, and we have to make sure that it does. And we have to understand that this didn't just happen. This happened because of organizing. It happened because of activists. Okay. Okay. I'm sure you know by now that Black and brown people are often not able to vote because of this systemic racism inherent in this system of ours. Republicans are really scared of the new multiracial, multi-ethnic, youth-driven majority and do not want it to emerge as the political powerhouse it has the potential for being. They do this by purging voter lists, limiting absentee ballots, restricting, passing restrictive voter ID laws. You know, like your signature has to be exactly the same. Everything you say has to be exactly the same. It's impossible. They have faulty, inadequate voting equipment. They're reducing early voting. They're closing precincts. Why do they do this? They do this because they know that Indigenous, young, and people of color are most likely to vote for Democrats. What was it, a few weeks ago, Donald Trump said, oh yeah, it was when the decision about outlawing absentee voting by mail in Wisconsin. He said if everybody voted by mail, something like no Republican would ever be elected again. It's the only smart thing I've ever heard him say anyway. But there are incredible people and organizations working to change all the bad things that I just listed, working to support communities of color on the ground, training people to defend and demand their rights, and organizing to push through November and beyond to build a truly just world. One of the people and organizations working to create this change is our guest today, Judith Brown Dianis, the executive director of the National Office of the Advancement Project. Now, the Advancement Project is a multiracial civil rights organization rooted in the great human rights struggles for equality and justice. They exist to fulfill America's promise of a caring, inclusive, and just democracy. They use innovative tools and strategies to strengthen social movements and achieve high-impact policy change. And they sit on the policy table of the movement for Black lives. The Advancement Project envisions a future where people of color can thrive, be safe, and exercise power. Judith Brown Dianis has served as a lawyer, professor, and civil rights advocate in the movement for racial justice. Hailed as a voting rights expert and pioneer in the movement to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, Dianis leads the Advancement Project National Office's work in combating structural racism in education, voting, policing, criminal justice, and immigration. She was awarded the Prime Movers Fellowship for Trailblazing Social Movements Leaders and was named one of the 30 Women to Watch by Essence magazine. She serves on the board of directors for Friends of the Earth and the Skadden Fellowship Foundation. We are so happy and honored to have you with us today, Judith. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jane. It's so great to be here with you.
And my first question is, what do people need to know about this November's election, and why should they care?
Oh, there's so much to know. First, let's start big picture. We are in an election, which, it feels like every election cycle, we say that this is the most important election of our lives. Well, actually, this one is the most important election of our lives. Our future is going to be on the ballot, and who is going to lead us through this very trying time, whether it is with regard to the pandemic that we're living through. Most of us, especially if you are in communities of color and Black communities, we're living through two pandemics. One is the pandemic of COVID-19, which has hit us harder due to structural racism, and the other is the pandemic of racism, which is around, which we're seeing exposed through the police killings. And I think what's important is that in November, we also know that we are going to have a very hard fought election because of the things that you mentioned, is that we have these movements that have come together. We see the browning of America, and there's this power grab and people holding on to the power that they have and scared of what the future might hold for us. And so what that means is that because there are people who have power who are scared of what they might lose, is that voter suppression is going to be hot and heavy. That we know that the Republican Party in particular has and continues to do everything possible to make it harder for people to vote. So we're in a fight. We're in a fight for our democracy. We're in a fight for our lives. We're in a fight for our freedom. And this November is going to mean a lot in terms of which direction we go in.
Why is vote by mail important to this election? I mean, is that the only reform that make a difference, or are there other ones to push for? What do you think?
Well, vote by mail is important. So when I talked about voter suppression, what we know is that there have been attempts by states to make it harder to vote for certain groups of people, people of color, older folks, and also younger people, especially college students. And so in this particular election, not only are we up against the typical voter suppression issues, but we're facing voting while COVID. And so vote by mail this year is very important because no one should have to choose between their health and the right to vote. And what we saw in Wisconsin during the primary, for example, people waiting in long lines in the midst of a pandemic. And so vote by mail is important because it will open up the opportunities for people to actually decide that I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to be safe, I'm going to vote from the convenience of my home. And so vote by mail is important. But of course, not every state, not every governor, not every secretary of state wants us to have free, fair, and accessible elections. And so this is the fight right now, is about how do we have access to easy and safe access to the ballot for everyone in the midst of a pandemic. And vote by mail is one of those things that we could be doing to make sure that we all have access to the ballot.
Mhm. And how do we try to make sure that that happens? What can people do?
Yeah. So there's the fight is on. So first of all, there's litigation that's going on. So for example, Advance Our Project, we have a lawsuit in Florida where we're fighting the state of Florida. You know, Governor DeSantis, who thinks everything should be normal, including like we should open up schools because we opened up Home Depot, really does not want to protect voters and thinks it's fine for people to have to stand in line during a pandemic. And so what we need people to be doing is pushing on their governors to make sure that their governors are and their secretaries of state are actually making vote by mail accessible to people. We need to make sure that there's a number of other things like registering to vote. This is the other thing, is that we know that a lot of people get purged and that they may not even know that they got purged. And so being able to register, check your registration, to make sure that you're on the rolls, to make sure that your family members are on the rolls, your friends are on the rolls, so that we can actually participate in this election. But also making sure that we know the rules of the road, because part of what's happened is there's a lot of confusion state by state. We vote differently. So there's a lot of confusion about whether or not I can actually use a vote by mail, whether or not I'm able to say that I feel I'm worried about being sick and that should be enough. And so we need to know the rules of the road around voting. And so that means checking with your Secretary of State's office to make sure that you can avail yourself of those opportunities.
Right. And I guess it's important to check with the registrar to make sure that your name, the name is the exact name. If you have an initial that it's there, it's the same.
That's
as
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And Jane, you mentioned this issue around signatures, because this is the other thing, is that what will happen with vote by mail is that they will check the voter's signature against their voter card. And so if you can, as a voter, you should update your signature card, because I know for me, like my signature, literally, I change my signature in probably just about every form that I sign. And sometimes I think, oh, well, you know, I'm doing this because I don't want people to know how to sign my name. And as we get older, our signature changes over time. And so these are the kinds of things that people need to do to update their voter registration, where you live, your signature, and be ready to make sure that everything is in place, because we don't need any excuses for them to knock us off the rolls, to not count our votes. But we need to make sure that everything is in place so that when election day comes, we're not having a problem.
It's only 4 months away.
Yeah,
Not
a lot of time.
No. Election protection and voter intimidation has been in the news lately. The news has said that Trump and the Republicans have raised $20 million and recruited 50,000 armed poll watchers to protect voting places. You know, this was done quite a while ago, right? And it really intimidated a lot of people and was very effective. It was outlawed. And then a period of time went by, and now the Republicans have brought this back. Obviously, this concerns you. How are organizations like yours dealing with this possible voter intimidation tactic at the polls?
Well, this is a different kind of election. So we're used to all being part of, there's an election protection program that most of our organizations participate in. There's a hotline that's 1-866-OUR-VOTE that people can call if they have a problem. And so typically you call in if you have a problem, and we dispatch people to the polling place, and some of that will still happen, probably at a smaller scale. But I want to talk just about some things that, like, while we're doing the litigation, Advance Our Project is also training up people to go meet with their local election officials, because part of the dirt around voter suppression happens before the election. So, for example, the closing of polling places. We saw long lines in Georgia, for example, and in Florida and other places during the primaries because many polling places were closed. There were several reasons for that. One is right before the election, before the primary, many poll workers quit because they were worried about the pandemic. While the governors decided, oh, business as usual, poll workers said, heck no, I'm not going and wiping down machines and running elections for you. And so, one of the things that we also need people to do is if you are healthy, if you can put on a mask, please sign up to be a poll worker. The average age of poll workers in this country is around 70 years old. So many of those folks who serve as poll workers are vulnerable to COVID-19. And so we need a new generation of poll workers who can participate in this election. And so that's something that people can do. The other thing for us is that while we are training up people to meet with election officials in advance, part of what we're monitoring is where are they closing polling places? Are they disproportionately closing them in communities of color? And we're tracking that. And we're going to push back on election officials if they do that. Voter intimidation. The other thing we do every election cycle is we meet with police departments to make sure that they're not going to have police stationed at polling places. We know, particularly in this election, that that's really important, that people don't need to go to vote and feel like there's the police officer who I don't trust and who I'm concerned about. So those are some things. I think the other thing that I would say to people that we would love for you to do is that Advancement Project has launched a petition that is very important. It is around a right to vote. In this country, we actually don't have a constitutional affirmative right to vote. And what that means is that we have about 13,000 election jurisdictions that run elections 13,000 different ways. And so what we're calling for is to call on Congress to give us an affirmative right to vote so that we can have some national standards around the right to vote and so that the courts will rule with us because we're also losing these things in the courts. So people can go to our petition, which is at advancementproject.org/RTV for right to vote petition, and it's /RTV petition, and sign the petition because we're going to push on Congress to do the right thing around the right to vote.
That's great. Thank God for the Advancement Project. Several states like Georgia, Wisconsin, and Ohio are removing voters from their rolls in preparation for November. And most of the people that are purged are Black, Indigenous, and people of color and young voters. According to the Brennan Center, 16 million voters have been purged since 2014 and 2016. And what can be done to ensure that people are not unjustly taken off the rolls? And what recourses are there for those who find themselves in this situation?
Purging has always been a tool of the vote suppressors. And especially because while we don't want dead people on the rolls, right? Like we need to have clean voter rolls so that we can run our elections efficiently. What is also important is that people tend to get purged because especially Black and brown and low income people and students get purged more often because they move more often. And so the people who don't want us to vote know that. And so we've had some really bad Supreme Court decisions that has opened the floodgates to purging. And so what we need to know, and I want to talk about that Supreme Court, because remember, this connects back to elections. If we don't have a good Senate, then we're going to get bad judges, which means that we're going to lose all these cases. And so what people need to do beyond voting is that we need to make sure that we update our voter registration. We call it kind of like check yourself. And not only that you check yourself to make sure that your address is up to date, but that also, reach out to 20 people that you know, 25 people that you know, ask them to do the same thing, because the effort to make sure that we cannot participate in this election is aggressive. And as you said, they have a lot of money and they're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to hijack democracy. So it's on us to make sure that we protect ourselves and can participate.
Yeah. I used to be on the board at the Carter Center, and I know that the Carter Center does a lot of, and Carter himself, a lot of, what is it called? When you come and you become a witness at the polls to make sure that things are,
Right.
yeah.
Poll watchers.
Yeah, official poll watchers.
Right.
Do we have, should we have, like, should we ask the UN or some international
Yes.
body to send us?
Well, you know, I would love to have the UN do that, but you know, unfortunately, the United States always poo-poos the UN, right? Like it's unfortunate, right? Even treaties, we don't care about the treaties that we've signed, right? But I do think that, to your point about poll watchers, that there are a few things, and I would love to have international poll watchers come in, but also that people can sign up with. Number one, you can sign up with election protection to be, but then you're outside the polling place. If you're a poll worker, right? You also get to administer the election and make sure that things are happening fairly. So being a poll worker and then being a poll watcher. Poll watchers, typically you sign up with your political party to be a poll watcher or with a candidate to be a poll watcher. And so yes, we need all hands on deck. You can sign up to be, again, poll worker, poll watcher, election protection volunteer. We need everyone to figure out what is the part that you can do to make sure that we are countering the voter suppression effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, what would I want to sign up for example? What is the best, which of those of possibilities would I want to sign up for so I could keep my eye on monkey business?
Well, Jane, I think you should be inside the polling place because I could imagine that you would call people out. So I think being, you know, if you feel good enough to mask up and to be protected and safe, because that's number one, is I want you to be safe in whatever volunteering you do. We want you to be safe, because if you don't feel that you can do that, the other thing is being a volunteer to answer the phones for candidates or for election protection is very important, because we need people who can tell us what's happening in the polling place, but also on the other end of that phone, when the voter calls and says, this is what happened to me, we need people to answer those calls so that we can get on the case.
So in that latter thing that you mentioned, should people get in touch with the Advancement Project for that? Or
you can there's actually a website for election protection. It is run by the Lawyers Committee under law, and we all the civil rights groups become part of it. And again, there's also a phone number, 1-866-OUR-VOTE, where you can be in touch with them that way also.
Would you say it again?
It's 1-866-OUR, OURVOTE, our vote.
Thank you. That's great. In a few weeks ago, the Movement for Black Lives invited the climate movement to a meeting to talk about how to work together and support each other's demands, which is something that Fire Drill Fridays is totally committed to doing. Share with our audience your view on working together in an intersectional way.
Sure. So, you know, this is, as there's a song that's part of a line from Drake, who has a line in a song that says, "What a time to be alive." We are at a moment in our country where we are seeing the broadest mass movement since this country's inception. People are taking to the streets, and you know, it is very intersectional. It is an alliance of progressives, and this moment is built upon a lot of history and a lot of solidarity work that has been done. You know, if I think about the climate justice movement in particular, you know, so many people, Black and Brown, stood with Indigenous people and environmentalists around Standing Rock. Black folks and Brown folks understand the importance of climate justice, because we're going to be the first ones to be removed from our land. When the waters rise in Florida and other places, when some people will be able to afford to move and just rebuild their lives, Black and Brown people will be the hardest hit. We've seen it when when we deal with hurricanes. So we fully understand and stand with the climate justice movement. And this particular moment, what we're seeing is something really beautiful, which is that not only do you have people who stood together at Standing Rock, but you also have people who stood together when Trayvon was murdered. You have the movement that was being built after Mike Brown was killed. Then let's add to that the Dreamers movement. Then let's add to that the Women's March, the March for Our Lives, the Sunrise Movement. All of these folks kind of coming together to say enough. Enough with the racism and the white supremacy. But they're also saying we want a planet that works for everyone. And so this is a moment, and this is why the other side's worried, because they know the power of the people. When we come together, we cannot be stopped.
Yeah. One of the people in the chat box said, Cork, the streets of Cork, Ireland are filled with the chants of the name of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd last week.
That's right.
That's right.
I mean, it is
Black Lives Matter March in Cork, Ireland.
Yes, it is amazing. For someone, you know, I've been doing this work for a while around racial justice, and to see this particular moment where people understand and are coming to grips with anti-Blackness and white supremacy, and we're having a different kind of conversation. I just think that it is a moment that is pregnant with opportunities for us to change not only this country, but this is a global movement of people saying, we are done with racism. We are done with sexism. We are done with patriarchy. And capitalism's coming too. We're coming for that too. And so it is wonderful. Thank you, people from Ireland, because we need everyone standing with us. And this is the thing, Jane, to your point about the intersectionality, is that we know that what we are also seeing is that people are not only going to stand for Black people, but that Black people are going to stand for the climate, and that brown people are going to stand for the climate, and that we are standing with Indigenous people as they are being hard hit by COVID. So it's a global movement, and it is beautiful.
It is beautiful. Let me ask you something that about one of the things that you're famous for. Some of the work of the Advancement Project is focused on ending the school to prison pipeline, which begins with excessive discipline in schools. Could you explain more fully what this is and share how the Advancement Project is working to address this?
Sure. So for the past, our organization's 21 years old, and for all of that time, we have been supporting grassroots organizations, which are parents, but mostly young people, like high school and middle school students, who are fighting back against harsh discipline. Because what we know is that young people of color, Black and brown, are being pushed out of school and into an unforgiving system of the juvenile justice system. And that it's for really ridiculous things, right? And so it started with zero tolerance. And we've been fighting against that and have really made some headway in being able to hold off these suspensions and to get young people in schools that are nurturing. But at the same time, as we were doing this work, what we found was a more ominous trend, was that young people were being directly pushed from school into the prison pipeline through the existence of police in schools. And so our organization, Advancement Project, and the Alliance for Educational Justice have a national campaign for police-free schools. And we've been doing this work for a number of years, trying to get police out of schools, because what we know is that the same police that we are protesting against in the streets are the police who are in the school hallways. And young people are not only being arrested in schools, but they are experiencing excessive use of force in our school hallways. And so young people have said, no, we want them out of our schools. We want schools that are nurturing. We want schools that help us. We want counselors. We want teachers who care about us. We don't want police in our schools. So this police-free schools movement is pretty incredible, because after George Floyd was killed, the Minneapolis School Board decided to take police out of schools in Minneapolis. And this is work that we have been doing for years, but the Minneapolis folks put it front and center and called the question about whether or not police needed to be in our schools and the impact of them on Black and brown students. And since then, we have seen about 10 cities where school boards have taken up this issue, where young people who have been leading. In Oakland, they actually dismantled the school police department. In Rochester, they ended the contract. In Denver, they ended the contract. And so the Police Free Schools work is like wildfire, that it's catching on, and we are going to have alternatives to police in schools to keep young people safe and nurtured and cared for.
Can you just be a little more specific about how they work in the schools? You said that they go sometimes directly from school to prison. Well, what does that mean?
So this is how it works. So there are some school districts that actually have their own police departments, where they have a police chief and they have lots of police, and they spend millions of dollars on a police department that reports to a school district. And what it looks like on a daily basis is not only that young people have to come into school through metal detectors, but also that they literally are being arrested. So you could have a young person who's running down the hallway, and who a teacher says, stop running down the hallway. And they call the police officer in, because the police is standing in the next hallway, call them over. The next thing you know, that young person is arrested for disorderly conduct. One case that really got my attention was some years ago, a 5-year-old girl who wanted to, she was playing a jelly bean counting game with her teacher. And the teacher said, it's time to stop. And like 5-year-olds do, she threw a temper tantrum and started throwing the jelly beans around the room. They took her down to the principal's office, where she continued this tantrum, and she pummeled the teacher with her little hands. She pulled some papers off the wall. She got on top of the desk and stamped her feet. The teacher and principal walked out of the room. And like 5-year-olds do, the temper tantrum stopped because no one was paying her attention. She sits down in her chair, and in walk 3 police officers. She's in a chair, quiet now. 3 police officers who come into the room, who pick her up, push her down against the table, pull her little arms behind her back, handcuff her, take her out to a police cruiser, where they shackle her at her ankles, and they leave her there crying for hours for her mommy. And so this is the kind of treatment that our babies, a little Black girl, of course, are seeing at the hands of cops in schools. Young people who have been torn out of their seats by police officers, young people who have been picked up and thrown down to the ground by police in schools, 100 pounds thrown to the ground by a police officer. And so it is time that we stop. Young people shouldn't have this trauma in a building where they should be nurtured. And so that is why we're calling for police-free schools. We're calling for an alternative vision. And what is beautiful about this moment is that it is young people who are envisioning something different, because they know that their freedom looks very different from what they are receiving in their schools.
God. You know, we obviously, you know, we know that white people's experience with police is different than Black people's. I've heard you say that it's the difference between the culture of law and order and the culture versus the culture of protect and serve. Is there anything you'd like to add to that conversation in light of this moment in our history?
Yes. So George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks are names that add to a long list of people who have lost their lives due to state violence. And every day, Black and brown people experience terror at the hands of police, whether it is as simple as hearing that sound of whoop, whoop, pull over when you're stopped by the police, or if it's someone like my husband who was stopped by the police some years ago and 6 officers, guns drawn on him, and telling him that someone stole a car that looked like his car. Or if it's young people who are walking down the street experiencing what we call jump outs, which are police who just get out the car, tackle you, ask you what's on you, pat you down, etc. So we know about the deaths, but white allies, you need to know that the terror that you are seeing that is being used against protesters every day with tear gas, et cetera, and the kinds of excessive force that's being used is what we experience every day. And so we can't tweak around the edges around police reform because we can keep saying, no chokeholds, no. Police do what police do, which is to terrorize us. So we're demanding a very different transformational view of how we have safety in this country in this moment. We're asking for investments and demanding investments in Black communities instead of police who kill us.
Where does your hope take root right now?
You know, some people would say that that this is a really hard moment, and there's a lot of pain in this moment. But my hope takes root in the young people who are on the streets. They are Black, they are brown, they are white, they are Asian, they are South Asian, they are gay, they are straight, they are trans, they are binary. It is a beautiful coming together of people who know what Dr. Vincent Harding used to say, which is, I am a citizen of a country that does not exist. And so these young people are breathing into America a different view, and they're getting us much closer to the freedom that we all want and deserve.
Should we take some questions from our audience? Maddie?
Yeah, thank you so much, Judith. That was beautiful. So first up, we have Jason on Zoom who asks, can you talk a bit more about what ordinary people can do to help expand voting rights access or help oppose voter suppression?
Sure. So again, I think there are a number of things. One is, again, being part of the system as a poll watcher or a poll worker is really important because that's where a lot of people get turned away from the polls, or their votes don't get counted, or they're told to vote by provisional ballot. And so let's not underestimate the kind of discretion and power that poll workers in particular have, and the judges in polling places, election judges. So that's a very important thing. 2 is making sure that everyone you know is not only registered, but that they have checked their registration within the past 60 days, right, before an election. We want to make sure that everything is up to date. 3rd is, again, there are local efforts with organizations that do civic engagement to do get out the vote, but also to do election protection. So you can be an election protection volunteer. And then lastly, we of course, again, want you to sign our petition to Congress to push for a right to vote. And you can find that at advancementproject.org/RTV petition. RTV is in vote petition.
Awesome. Thank you, Judith. From Lana on Facebook, does voter suppression impact the climate crisis? And if so, how?
So voter suppression does, because of the fact that what voter suppression does is that it silences particular groups of people. And the target of the voter suppression efforts have been Black and brown people who are, as Jane mentioned, big supporters of climate justice, right? Like this is the thing I want environmentalists to know, because I'm on the board of Friends of the Earth. So the membership of environmental groups might be mostly white, but that does not mean that Black and brown people are not down with the cause of environmental justice. And so the more that we silence Black and brown people who should have a voice in our democracy and who will vote along with the climate justice folks, then we're going to continue to lose on environmental issues.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if the current president gets reelected,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we're going to lose the environment. We're going to lose the climate. I mean, it would be so hard to force that maniac. Forgive me. We have to have somebody, and I think that the alternative Democratic candidate, we can push him. We can persuade him. Yeah.
Great. And
So,
the next question.
Next question.
Thanks, Jane. The next question is from Falabi on Zoom. And Falabi asks, what is being done to ensure the rights of returning citizens to vote in this election?
Sure, well, that's a good one. So again, this is one of those things where every state has a different rule about who gets to vote and who does not get to vote. Another reason why we need a constitutional amendment for a right to vote. So in various states, so for example, in Florida, where there were 1.4 million people who could not have the right to vote, and the voters passed an amendment to the Constitution in order to have those people able to vote. And then the state legislature made sure that the thing that would get in their way is whether or not they paid fines and fees. And so that is caught up in court right now. And in fact, there was a decision just this past week that did not look good. So there's a lot of confusion about what is going to happen to that 1.4 million people, but we're still telling the 1.4 million people, go find out whether or not you have fines and fees. The Florida Rights Restoration Coalition is the organization that is taking the lead on this. They are helping pay some of the fines and fees for people because we want to have a clean slate for folks so that they can participate in the election. In places like we're doing litigation in Louisiana around this issue. We were able to work with an organization called Voice of the Experienced, where we were able to get legislation passed so people on probation and parole would have a shorter waiting period before they had their rights restored. And now we did some litigation around it. We're going to be back in court because we need to make sure that the state actually does what they say they're going to do. And so again, unfortunately, this is state by state that we are fighting this fight. But there are organizations across the country who we partner with who are leading these efforts, mostly led by people who are impacted.
The next question is from Julia on Zoom. Julia says, we're obviously seeing a huge decrease in polling places, especially in southern states in recent weeks and months. Is there anything we can do to prevent this from happening before it's voting day for our state?
Yes, so polling places. So let me say that a couple of things. Polling places are closing for a number of reasons. One is intentional voter suppression. Two is that they are, because of COVID, some polling places have had to close down because they're in, so for example, a lot of polling places in Florida are actually in nursing homes. And so because of COVID, they can't have outside people coming in to vote. So that's the second thing. And what we're also seeing is that in places where they don't want us to vote, what they're doing is they're using the pandemic as an excuse. They're saying, oh, well, you got to vote by mail. So what do you need all these polling places for? And so they're closing polling places. And what we want is we want people to have options. We should be able to vote at a polling place because some people, that's what they do. They're used to going to a polling place and it's important. And so what we need to be doing is, we need to fight back with these election officials. There are local election officials at every county level. There's a local election official. We need to be tracking, what are they doing? How many polling places are they closing? In Georgia, for example, there are election board meetings that are open hearings. Go to those meetings, see what they're doing, because this happens behind the curtain. Even though they're open meetings, people don't go. So it's really behind the curtain. So let's start calling them on this, asking them, where are you closing the polling places? And if you know those places are in communities where they want to suppress the vote, let's fight back. Because a lot of these folks are elected. So we can get rid of these election officials if we can't hold them accountable.
I think we have time for one more, Maddie.
Yeah, I think so. So this question, a good one from Robert on Zoom, Can you please offer more ideas on how to get new voters motivated and convinced to vote? For example, how do I convince those who think that who gets elected doesn't mean anything?
Well, so a few things. One is too often we talk about the up ticket. We talk about the top of the ticket. We talk about president, right? And there are a lot of people who will be motivated around the presidential election, but there are some who feel like, well, my vote will get lost in that. But here's the thing. We have down ticket races that are very important. So for example, if you care about police, there are sheriff's races in places. So for example, we're working in Georgia with the New Georgia Project. There are 150 plus sheriff's races in the state of Georgia. In Florida, there are 66 sheriff's races. And so if you care about policing, then you should care about sheriffs because they're the police. The other thing is prosecutors. We have mass incarceration because we have prosecutors that like to lock people up, especially people of color. And so finding those down ticket races, so Florida, New Orleans, there's a big prosecutors race. So these are the other things that we've got to connect to where people are. People may not really care about Trump, but there are a lot of people who care about who their school board is, who their sheriff is. And so let's connect to where people are and don't assume that they just care about the presidential election.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, when you're an activist on the ground, you really realize how important all those down ballot are, boards of supervisors, city councils, sheriffs. Yeah. So I want to brag to you for a second, Judith, about the work piece and Fire Drill Fridays, because we have thousands of activists, and hopefully more will sign up today, who are helping us identify voters who've been purged and then re-registering them. Yeah.
That is so important, Jane, because I'm telling you, this purge thing, they purged, this is like hundreds of thousands of people just in Georgia alone. Yeah. We have to recapture those people because they're going to assume that they're registered and they're going to show up in November and they are going to be out. So, so congratulations on doing that. That is really important. We have to have that happen. So people need to sign up with Greenpeace to help volunteer to do this work.
And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
So grateful, and I know that everybody who's been listening is so grateful to you for and for the Advancement Project. And keep it up and stay strong and stay safe. And thank you for joining us today. And thank all of you so much for being part of us today. If you haven't already, please text Jane to 877-877. See, what that will do is that will allow us to be in touch with you. For example, next week to send you that in memoriam video that we're asking people to send to senators. We've got to get the HEROES Act passed. Too many lives depend on that. So text Jane to 877-877. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Fire Drill Fridays and Greenpeace are launching a massive electoral organizing program to ensure that we elect climate champions and racial justice champions up and down the ballot. And all this can be done from the comfort of your home. So please go to firedrillfridays.com/volunteers and sign up so our organizers can reach out to you and get you plugged in. I hope you'll join us. Please stay safe, take care of each other, stay healthy, and I'll see you next week.
When I was choosing my university, I asked myself, what do I want to be?
This is a place where I can think openly and be independent.
I want to be taught by leaders in their academic field.
I want to be challenged and I want to be inspired.
I chose to come to York because it is a world-class university with a big focus on research and using that research to inform the studying that you do here as well.
York's got a really good academic reputation. It's in the Russell Group.
From a very young age, I used to come here like on family visits, and it was kind of my aspiration to study here. We were in such a lovely setting.
And it's just lovely to be living in a city with so much oomph. And there's so much heritage and history right on our doorstep. You could never get bored.
I think studying at York, it has really opened up my mind what is available out there. I feel that it's really my home. When I come from travel all over the place and then I go to York and I was just like, yes, this is home.
Independent study is very important at a university level because it helps you sort of realize your own voice. And I think very importantly, it creates discipline.
It teaches you how to prioritize in life, and that's what independent study is all about.
There's a lot of stuff always happening on campus.
And I think it has everything that you can need as a student.
The flexibility that you get to really develop yourself outside of the course is probably the best reason to come to York.
I believe that the University of York has given me the opportunity to make great contacts as well as learn the skills that are going to drive you through the industry as well.
You're not just coming out of a degree, you're coming out with the skills that you can actually use in work as well.
I'm really proud of everything I've achieved here.
There are very, very few universities around the world today that combine our research strengths and excellence and global stature with the uncommon level of openness that we have.
My name is Merrick Gertler, and I'm the president of the University of Toronto.
Our success as a university depends on the quality of the urban region around us. Toronto is one of the world's most culturally diverse cities, and it is a huge asset for us. The point of leveraging our location is to do everything we can as citizens of the University of Toronto to make the Toronto area a better and better place. The problems that are most vexing in society today